Harry had always been good at making a spectacle of himself, but this time, he seemed to have outdone even his own reputation. Within a matter of days, he managed to alienate those closest to him, all while maintaining a misguided belief that he was somehow in the right. His every action, each word spoken, seemed to push him further into the role of the family's troublemaker. Yet it was clear to everyone around him that his antics were no longer just about seeking attention. They were about maintaining relevance, even at the expense of those he supposedly cared about. It began innocently enough. A few well-placed comments here and there, a couple of interviews that hinted at deeper, more personal matters. But soon enough, it became obvious that Harry was doing everything he could to stay in the public eye. The lines between private and public were blurred beyond recognition, and no matter how many times he claimed to be working for the greater good of the family, it only seemed to fuel the fire. What was truly astounding, though, was how little he seemed to understand the damage he was causing. He had become so consumed with keeping himself relevant that he didn't notice how everyone around him was pulling away. His father, once a steady figure in his life, was now a mere background character in Harry's ever-growing media circus. And yet, in his mind, all of it, every misstep, every self-inflicted wound, was justified by the need to be seen, to be heard, to be acknowledged. Despite everything, Harry was still oblivious to the fact that his actions had pushed him further from the family he claimed to love. The more he tried to fit himself into the narrative, the more he found himself standing alone, surrounded only by the echoes of his own misguided decisions. Harry sat comfortably in his favorite chair, the small room around him barely big enough to hold the weight of his thoughts. His gaze wandered aimlessly as he mulled over his next move, the ever-present feeling that he was missing something crucial gnawing at him. It had been a long time since he'd truly connected with his father, and the thought lingered in his mind like an itch he couldn't scratch. Maybe this is the chance to finally fix things, he thought to himself. He had long since realized that to regain any semblance of closeness with his family, he needed to be more than just a distant figure. He had to be ever present, always in the spotlight, constantly accessible when the media came knocking. Suddenly, as though struck by a bolt of inspiration, a new idea began to form. Why wait quietly in the background, hoping for the best, when he could seize control of the narrative? Why not make a grand entrance? After all, if he didn't make his presence known now, who would notice? The thought hit him like a light bulb flickering to life, and Harry smiled to himself. In his mind, the path forward was clear. He didn't need to sit silently and wait. He needed to speak out, make waves, and perhaps, just perhaps, his actions would stir the kind of attention that would bring him back into the fold. And so, with a sense of determined purpose, he decided it was time to go meet the king. Surely this would be the step that would bring the family back together, or at the very least, make headlines. What better way to step into the spotlight than to take the first move himself, right? No more waiting, no more quiet contemplation. The game was on. Harry sat across from his father, feeling a mixture of unease and anticipation. The room was quiet, the tension thick between them, as he tried to convince himself that this meeting would be the beginning of mending their fractured relationship. He hadn't seen Charles in what felt like ages, and he desperately wanted this to be the moment that would fix everything. The idea of reconciliation, of truly making amends, loomed over him like a heavy weight, yet his mind was already wandering elsewhere, searching for something more. As he listened to his father speak, Harry's inner PR strategist suddenly lit up with a sharp, almost electric clarity. It wasn't enough to simply reconnect, to quietly sit and have a heart-to-heart. No, there had to be more. The thought crept into his mind. Why not share a few of these private moments with the world? This could be the perfect opportunity to keep his name in the public eye, to remind everyone of his importance. Without fully realizing the gravity of what he was about to do, Harry made a decision. In the midst of the meeting, His focus shifted from family to fame, and he began thinking about how he could turn this private moment into another headline. The next interview was just around the corner, and so he casually dropped the statement that would shake everything. With the calmness of someone announcing an everyday detail, he shared his focus for the year. "My focus will be on my dad next year." It wasn't a gesture of care or compassion. No, it was an announcement, a declaration that would be broadcasted, written about, discussed, everywhere. The story was no longer about the father and son trying to rebuild their relationship, but about how Harry, once again, could place himself at the center of it all. In that moment, it wasn't about helping his father. It was about making sure everyone saw him doing it. It was about positioning himself in the narrative, ensuring that he was the hero of this story, even if it meant turning something deeply personal into yet another spectacle. As the days passed, Harry started to feel the weight of his decisions settling in. The media frenzy he had hoped for didn't feel quite as exhilarating as he had imagined. The focus was no longer just about reconnecting with his father or making amends. It had morphed into something far more invasive. The once private conversations about his father's health had taken on a life of their own, with every word, every mention, becoming a headline. What he had intended as a simple, heartfelt expression of concern had been twisted into a spectacle, something far more exploitative than he had ever intended. It was then that the realization began to dawn on him. The spotlight he craved had not only come with the attention he sought, but with a level of scrutiny he hadn't anticipated. His every action, every attempt at sincerity, was being dissected and interpreted in ways he hadn't predicted. It wasn't just about family anymore. It was about public perception, and that was a game he knew all too well. He could feel the discomfort creeping in, the growing awareness that what had started as a genuine attempt to help his father was now something far darker. But instead of feeling regret, Harry quickly rationalized it. In his mind, it no longer mattered how the situation had spiraled. What was important was that he was still in the public eye. The role of the concerned son was still his to play, and as long as he maintained that image, he could keep the media's attention. Who cared about the emotional cost or the damage done to his family? Publicity was all that mattered now. After all, in his world, there was always a way to rehabilitate one's image. The narrative could always be shifted, reframed, and repackaged. And so, with no second thoughts, he resolved to keep pushing forward, clinging to the role that kept him relevant. Because, in the end, what was family if not another tool to manipulate for public gain? Charles sat in his office, surrounded by papers and messages, his frustration simmering just below the surface. The steady click of his pen against the desk was the only sound in the otherwise quiet room, but it did little to calm him. As he scrolled through yet another article detailing Harry's latest public comments, he could feel his patience waning. He had been foolish, hadn't he? Why had he even agreed to meet with Harry? Why hadn't he just sent him and Meghan back to Australia, where they belonged, away from the constant media circus? The king gritted his teeth, his mind replaying the series of events. Harry's bold statements, his complete disregard for family privacy, had gone too far. It wasn't as though Charles hadn't been aware of his son's penchant for drama, but this time, Harry had crossed a line. He had hoped, perhaps naively, that the meeting would offer some sort of reconciliation, a chance to mend their relationship. But instead, it had become another public spectacle, another opportunity for Harry to throw the family into the media spotlight. As Charles sifted through more articles, each one more damning than the last, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of betrayal. He had genuinely wanted to connect with his son, to find a way to rebuild the bond they had lost. But instead, he found himself watching as Harry used their private conversation as the foundation for another headline-grabbing scandal. The cynicism of it all stung more than he cared to admit. Harry had never seemed so detached, so willing to use anything and anyone for his own personal gain. It was clear now that this wasn't about healing wounds. It was about maintaining relevance at any cost. And Charles, sitting in his office, could do nothing but fume in silence, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. Harry had become an expert at staying in the spotlight, even if it meant constantly rehashing the same tired stories. Despite all the supposed emotional interviews and complaints about his difficult life as a royal, he never seemed to tire of being at the center of attention. He would often lament, as he had so many times before, that no one truly understood the hardships he faced as a member of the royal family. The irony was not lost on anyone, least of all his critics. It was hard to take his grievances seriously when it became clear that every new interview, every public display of frustration, was just another calculated move to keep him on the front pages. It wasn't about personal growth or reconciliation. It was about perpetuating his own narrative. In each carefully crafted interview, Harry's words rang hollow to those who had watched him over the years. He continued to play the role of the misunderstood victim, conveniently ignoring his own part in the drama. His every action was now a carefully executed PR stunt, a way to feed his personal brand, ensuring that the media would continue to feed him attention. Meanwhile, his father, King Charles, quietly stayed out of the limelight, trying to repair his tarnished reputation while his son reveled in the chaos he had created. Charles didn't need to make headlines. He was content with staying behind the scenes, hoping that things might calm down eventually. But Harry, of course, couldn't resist the allure of the spotlight. The more Harry tried to position himself as a martyr, the more obvious it became that he was doing nothing more than manipulating the public's perception of him. It wasn't about healing family wounds. It was about crafting a story that kept him relevant. It was all a performance, and he was the lead actor, no matter how tired the plotline had become. To the public, he was still the royal rebel, the one who always stirred up trouble. But now, he wore the crown of victimhood. He thrived on the drama, feeding off the media's obsession with him. In the end, Harry was back where he loved to be, on his pedestal. But it was a fleeting victory, one that would last only as long as the next scandal or media frenzy. He had become a master at creating his own narrative, but as time passed, it was clear that he couldn't keep up the facade forever. Eventually, someone would find a way to outshine him, to outmaneuver him in the media game. But for now, he would remain in the spotlight because in the world of public relations, even a tarnished reputation was still a reputation. As long as people were talking about him, Harry would always be at the center of the action, playing the role of the tragic hero in a drama of his own making.